Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a cybersecurity expert, extreme sports enthusiast, and the author of 2 nonfiction books. The Smartest Person in the Room, The Root Cause and New Solution of Cybersecurity, and the In-Between, Life in the Micro. His name is Christian Espinosa, and my interview with Christian will follow the teleportation sound. Christian Espinosa, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, I'm Christian. I've written a couple of books. I'm working on my 3rd and 4th book, actually. My first book is about my cybersecurity journey with my company and some of the problems I had in the company, which were with emotional intelligence or a lack of emotional intelligence. So I wrote about how to fix that in my company. My second book is more of a focused memoir about where I've got things right and where I got things wrong because I was too hyper-focused on a big goal and I often missed the things right in front of me. And the book I'm working on right now, one of them is about medical device cybersecurity for my company, and one of them is about the story we tell ourselves. We're often hindered or held back in life by the story we've created for ourselves, or that story can also be one that propels us forward if we change it.
Without spoiling too much of because you've written a couple of books, without spoiling too much of your book, The Smartest Person in the Room, The Root Cause and New Solution of Cybersecurity, what is it about?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit of my intro about the books. That is with my first cybersecurity business, Alpine Security. I had a lot of problems in the business and I paid a lot of dumb tax, as they say. And I noticed when I zoomed out and looked at the problems, 99% of them were because my staff lacked emotional intelligence. These are highly rationally intelligent individuals because they have to be super smart to do cybersecurity. They just didn't have the people skills or the emotional intelligence, and they were talking over clients' heads, not collaborating very well, just trying to look for opportunities to prove how smart they were. And that's where most of my problems were in the company. So I worked really hard at fixing that with my staff, and I had to let some people go, closing the gap, I should say, on the emotional intelligence. And I wrote about that in the book, that I came up with 7 overarching steps that will help you if you're lacking in people skills and emotional intelligence, develop that in that area.
Why did you write The Smartest Person in the Room?
Well, I wanted to capture that journey of teaching the emotional intelligence to my staff and what ended up working. I thought it'd be beneficial to my industry. I think in my industry, a lot of people, their ego is driven by how, quote, smart they are, which is in one aspect, typically just intellectual abilities. And just because you're smart in one area doesn't mean you're smart in other areas. And I'm trying to help my industry and other high-tech industries because I think one of the biggest challenges we have are people that will do everything possible from an ego perspective to prove how intellectually superior they are, which includes talking over people's heads and poorly collaborating with others.
What is the biggest now I'm going to pivot to cybersecurity in general with this question. What is the biggest challenge regarding cybersecurity today?
The biggest challenge is people don't understand risk, including cybersecurity professionals. I just got out of a meeting, ironically, and we were talking about risk. And this is with a medical device, so that the severity of the risk or the impact should be in terms of patient safety. And we were discussing or almost arguing about the risk, and it wasn't in terms of patient safety. But with a medical device, like a surgical robot or a drug infusion pump or an in vitro diagnostic system, the impact is if something goes wrong, somebody hacks in this device, what can they do? What effect can they cause to a patient? It could be death. Can it be, physical harm? Can it be whatever? And it's that risk that is commonly misunderstood in cybersecurity, because if you don't understand the risk, you don't know what to fix and what order to fix it in, and you can't fix everything all at once. And I from my near 30 years of experience, most people do not understand risk. And risk is the intersection of probability and impact. A lot of people kind of understand how likely it is that something can happen or the probability, but where they fail to close the gap is on the impact. And if you don't understand the impact, it's hard to rank order the risk and know what to fix because you can't fix everything with limited resources.
You've also written a book called The In-Between Life in the Micro. Without spoiling too much of that book, what is it about?
That book is about my life. It's more of a focused memoir about where I got things right and where I got them wrong. I'm someone that gets hyper focused on a macro goal, as I like to call it. And I often would get so focused on the next big thing, the next big goal, the macro level goal, that I would put blinders on and miss things right in front of me and not pay attention to them and actually find them irritating or distracting. And when I looked at my life, I realized I destroyed, some relationships that were important to me for some big goal. I had, some health challenges and some financial challenges because I got so focused on a big goal. And at the end of the day, I accomplished all those big goals, but I was there by myself because, like I mentioned, I let a relationship dissolve in front of me because I didn't take 5 minutes out of my day to spend with a person I love or let them know. I just thought the fact that they needed my attention or was a distraction from that goal. So yeah, it's about me coming to terms with that aspect of myself and trying to find balance between right now, the micro moments, and also being able to pursue that macro level goal as well.
Is it true that a motor vehicle crash you were involved in inspired you to write The In-Between? And if not, what did?
I was kind of like having several like topics in my mind that I wanted to write the book about. And that accident did inspire me to do it. I felt like an inner voice or the voice of God or the universe spoke to me in that moment to write the book about that. And the reason it was is in that car accident, there was a woman driving a car and a man driving a truck, and it was a pretty high-speed accident in an intersection. And my girlfriend and I were involved. The truck got pushed backwards and hit our vehicle a little bit, but we got out to help. And the woman, her car was like completely smashed. She got out of her car, and there's like, I don't know why. I think she was in shock. She looked like her arm was broken and her leg was broken. She's bleeding, glasses like falling off of her. And my girlfriend went in and like caught her before she collapsed on the ground. And the only thing that woman wanted to do was talk to her husband. And she didn't have her cell phone. She couldn't find it because the accident was pretty chaotic. So she just kept screaming, "Call my husband." And I dialed her husband's number on my cell phone. And, the only thing that mattered to her in that moment was talking to her husband and telling him that she was okay. And I thought, in the big scheme of life, we often forget what's important. But when you have a moment like that, which was a macro moment, this is a micro thing in that moment, like it became crystal clear what was important to her. And it made me realize that I had missed out on a lot of things in my life because I lost sight of what was important to me.
What are the easiest and hardest parts about writing books for you?
The easiest part is getting everything down. The hardest part is structuring it in a logical manner and cutting out the unnecessary components. For me, I use Otter.ai a lot, and while I'm driving or walking or thinking about something, I would just vocalize it, and then Otter translates it into a transcript. So I have lots and lots of ideas and lots of content. That's not the hard part for me. It's taking all of that and making it understandable and logical and interesting enough so somebody will be able to understand it and stay engaged.
Are both of your books self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid published, or did you use different publishing methods for each of your books?
My first book is technically self-published. I used a company called Scribe Media, which had a little bit of falling out, and I think they've rebooted to help me get it published. And it was published under their label Lioncrest. My second book, I published it. I had someone help me publish it, but I created my own, I forgot what you call it, not the label, but the own imprint for the book called Shrinking Ego. That is my imprint, and that's who I published the book under.
You mentioned your 7-step secure methodology earlier in the interview. What is that, and how does the secure methodology course you offer work?
Yeah, the 7 steps are designed to take somebody from wherever they are and help them develop the emotional intelligence to improve in pretty much all aspects of your life. And I can briefly go through the 7 steps. So the first step is awareness. We have to start with self-awareness. And I talk about in my course and my book a lot about neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. From an awareness perspective, we're actually very predictable. We like to think we're not, but if we experience a trigger, like somebody saying something a certain way, we might automatically start getting defensive and respond in a defensive manner. That's like a program that just executes in our brain, in our body automatically. It's a default behavior. And from an awareness perspective, we need to understand, like, if that behavior is not serving us, we have the ability to install or create a different behavior, but we have to be aware to do that. The second step is mindset. I believe in a growth mindset, which means we believe our traits are not fixed. Our brain is malleable and we can actually change. If you have a fixed mindset, which is a contrast to the growth, you just think that you are the way you are and you don't believe you can change. The third step is acknowledgement. I think it's important to acknowledge how far we've come in life. It's often easy to get discouraged if you don't look at the big picture. And for me, I realized that as a leader, I had a problem acknowledging myself. And if I couldn't acknowledge myself, I would have a problem acknowledging my staff. So now, even like small things I do, it's important to have some gratitude and acknowledge yourself. The fourth step is communication. I'm a proponent of communication, and the NLP concept or the presupposition that resonates with communication is the meaning of communication is the response you get. So if you're not getting the response you want out of someone, or you're not getting the budget, or your spouse or your partner's not understanding you, the ownership shifts back to you to alter how you're communicating. But what we often do is just blame the other person, which doesn't serve anybody. And then the fifth step is monotasking. Monotasking is the opposite of multitasking. I think multitasking is an extreme waste of time. And monotasking is doing one single thing with concentrated effort for a period of time. And this helps with two things. It helps you be more productive, because with multitasking, you're very busy, but you're not productive. And monotasking also helps you be present. A lot of us today are trying to like have a conversation with somebody while we're on their cell phone, and we're not present. So we're missing out on the conversation, and the person we're with often doesn't feel like we care about them because we're too busy being distracted. The sixth step is empathy. I think today in our society, there's so much division against everything. There's the pro-vaxxers, anti-vaxxers, the Republicans, Democrats, woke, non-wokes, liberal, non-liberal, and it's hard to be empathetic when you don't see your fellow human beings as a fellow human being. If you only see them as a label that the media and politicians have largely helped propagate, then it's hard to be empathetic. For me, a couple years ago, I was in the ER and went to the hospital, and I ended up having 6 blood clots in my left leg. And the doctor came out and talked to me, and he said, "You've got blood clots. You got 6 in your left leg." And I was like, "Okay, what does that mean?" Because I'm not an expert in this area. He said it meant I could die or have a stroke at any moment. And I started freaking out. I was like there by myself. I started crying, kind of shaking a little bit, thinking, man, my life might be over like in the next 5 minutes. And, did I live a good life? But everything was going through my head. And he saw me freaking out. And what he said to me, I'll never forget it. He said, "Oh, don't worry. I see this all the time." And I kind of got pissed off because I was like, you know what? I don't see this all the time. And from an empathy perspective, again, it was that division. He was seeing himself as a doctor and me as a patient versus me as a fellow human being that just got some pretty bad news. So that I think that was a problem with his approach. And the last step is Kaizen. Kaizen is a Japanese word. It means continuous and never-ending improvement. In anything we do in life, if we take a step and adapt the philosophy that as long as we're making progress, that's what matters. It gives us courage to take that first step, and it allows us to maybe get a little bit worse at something before we get better, and understand that mastery is a journey. It's not an overnight thing. So that's a high level of the 7 steps.
What my final question for this interview? What are some extreme sports you partake in, and why do you participate in extreme sports?
uh, I for some reason I'm compelled to do things where there's a waiver involved. Like if you can lose your life or lose your limbs, because and it says that in the waiver, I'm compelled to do it. So right now, uh, I've got a few extreme sports on my list. In the past, I've done skydiving. I've done like 300 skydives. I've done 24 Ironman triathlons, climbed a couple mountains. But right now, the thing I'm gearing up towards is an F4, like a Formula 4 car race where you have, open wheel and open cockpit. And I'm getting ready for that as much as I can. And it's pretty dangerous. From what I understand, I'm looking at getting a helmet. And I thought I'd just get like a cheap helmet, but the store I went to told me I need to get a ballistic grade helmet. I don't even know what that is. They're saying if you're going like 150 miles an hour on a track and a rock is thrown up from the car in front of you, it can go through a normal helmet. So you need this helmet that the rock, which is basically like a bullet, I guess, going that fast, will not go through the helmet. The reason I like sports like that, I feel like I'm living life a little bit on the edge. I like risk. And I feel like it forces me to learn something new and learn how to manage risk and get better to skill. With like the driving the cars, I started doing a lot of go-karting to prepare for that. And it's like I enjoy learning a new skill, and particularly when the skill involves, my ability to handle the physical demands, the sensory input, and make decisions and make them very quickly.
Christian, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. You're an awesome host.
Christian was a fascinating guest to interview, and it was wonderful to have him on this podcast. I will provide one final update on my upcoming AuthorTube video before I upload it. I will be uploading the video on Sunday, September 15th. I apologize for the continued delays once again, but I am making considerable progress on video production. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.